One of the best things about reading Jami, and I'm sure some of you have had the same feeling, is that you feel like you know her immediately. Her writing has that generous, welcoming quality. But I came all this way to meet you as her first memoir. And one of the things that I love about it, and I think that it's particularly pertinent for tonight, is that in many ways it's a book about place and about places, about where she's from and where she might be going as a writer and as a person. Um, we learn in this book that Jami was 45 before she owned her first bed, that she once slept in 26 places in 7 months. And because I think we could use a little bit of orientation, I'm hoping, Jami, that you can read the intro or kind of the preface of the book. You tell us what we're calling it, what the term of art is. But if you can read that for us to give everyone an idea, that would be wonderful.
It's the preface. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Thank you for having me. Thank you all for coming. It's really, really exciting to be here. And I'll just read, it's just a couple pages. For a long time, I worked day jobs that were different from the one I have now. For 20 years, I hustled. I ran the cash register at a pharmacy. I counted pills. I sold lottery tickets. I squatted on the ground and counted boxes of enemas during monthly inventory. I shelved books in a college library. I waitressed. I wiped countertops. I took out the trash when my shift was over and married the ketchup bottles too, cleaning off the dried red crust from the tops, which led to a loathing of ketchup, the scent of it, the taste, the texture for the rest of my life. I flirted for tips. I did shots with strangers. I counted out my money at the end of the night. I worked in a pool hall. I worked in a beach bar. I worked the door at warehouse parties. I checked lists. I did drugs in the bathroom. I sent people on their way. Temped, I filed, I answered phones, I typed up letters, and then I faxed them across town. I pointed people in the right direction down the hall, one flight up. You just missed him. I worked in 50 different offices all these lives. I took food from the conference room without asking. I replaced women on maternity leave, never men. I lent a hand when they were short staffed. There was a big mailing, me alone in an empty room stuffing envelopes, fingers stung with paper cuts at the end of each day. I worked temp to perm and was supposed to feel grateful. If you play your cards right, kid, never made it to perm. I worked in an assisted living facility where every day a resident named George came into my office, often introducing himself to me as if we were meeting for just the first time. He carried a hoe with him, which had belonged to his grandfather, who had brought it with him from Norway decades ago, and George would use it to tend the roses in the garden outside the facility. Sometimes he would tell me the same story about the hoe, too. George was sweet, and he was a gentleman. I learned a lot about people and how to be in the world. I worked for a startup where my job was essentially to type really fast all day long. I talked to no one for months. I just typed. The next job, I signed people into conference rooms and assisted with their meetings and listened to them talk about their important jobs while they ignored my existence. I smiled when I didn't feel like it. I tried another job and another job and another job, always searching for a place I could call home. I was creative and I was curious, and there was a propulsiveness to my life. I was completely engaged in forward motion, and yet I had no specific direction. A problem I had figuring out the direction. I spell checked. I sent emails. I did math. I copy edited. They would find out I could write and then ask me to write something, and it would only be a paragraph or two, but it made me feel important and special and necessary, and like I wasn't totally wasting my life, even if I was writing something that wasn't interesting at all. A forgettable arrangement of words, a decoration on a page, the baby's breath of corporate America. I found a way into working on the internet, which was then the new frontier. I wrote, I produced plenty of it garbage. I learned what code was. I learned what keywords were. I learned how to structure a website, information architecture. I liked the idea of that, organizing information. I learned how to write short and snappy things. I worked for advertising agencies, lots of them. It felt like every agency in town. I watched things I wrote finally exist in the world with the recognition that no one would ever know it came from me. I was detached from the thing I was making. I had no ownership of it. On the side, I started writing personal things on the internet, blog posts, little essays here and there, began to tune the sound of my voice. I argued with my coworkers about things that seemed important at the time. I asked for raises and got them. I quit. I got fired. A few times I didn't get jobs because people read something I had written on the internet. I had jobs where I was taken less seriously or my opinions dismissed entirely for being a woman. I have been told I am difficult. I am difficult in the sense that I am not easy, but fuck easy. I've been harassed at work, but seriously, who hasn't? I worked for a cable network on websites for critically acclaimed television shows, all of which were created by men. It was the best job I ever had besides the one I have now. I watched how everyone ran around making these shows happen. What a massive amount of work went into their production. Such brilliant people worked on them. But all of the credit was given to the show's creators, their creativity, their genius. They had come up with the ideas. They had ownership. The rest of us were there to make their vision come to life. We served their ideas. Eventually, I thought, what about my ideas? When do I own them? And once I realized that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I could not stay where I was any longer. I just gave this advice to someone the other day, actually. The solution was to write my way out of the problem, writing your way out of the problem. That meant writing early in the morning, late at night, and on weekends. It meant carving out time, claiming it for myself. I thought, I will write this first book and then maybe another after that. This is the thing I want to do. This desire informed life choices I made, paths I took, and paths I rejected. Everything got easier in a way once I realized this was what I wanted, even as things got much, much harder. I had decided to operate in service of my ideas. There are plenty of reasons why I write. This is just one of them. The sense that I want to own something, own my work, own my creativity, own my name. It is perhaps not the purest reason, not truest of heart, for there is some ego attached to it, but it is real. I own these words. I own these ideas. Here is my book.
That was just a thrill getting to hear that in your own voice. Um, so Jami, we know and love you as a novelist. Obviously, you've done a lot of first person writing before in essays and pieces of journalism, but how did you know it was time for a memoir? Is it something you'd wanted to do for a long time? Was it the pandemic? Was it novel fatigue? Was it time for a new creative challenge? Like, just what was the germ?
So it was definitely one of those things where I would never, ever, ever do it. And then all of a sudden it made sense to do it, which is, it's usually works out that way, that it's a bad idea until it's a good idea. So I actually had sold it before the pandemic. So conveniently, I had the whole pandemic to sit there alone by myself and contemplate myself. But which is not exactly how I would have wanted to do it, but that is what happened. But it did help me to like really focus and sit down and really think about what writing meant to me in a different way. But I would say that part of it was novel fatigue. I believe that that's correct. I had written 7 books in 14 years. So I had a book out every 2 years. And it's not that I didn't have anything else to say. It was maybe that I just didn't know how I wanted to say it next. And I had written so many essays over the years. When you have a book come out, you end up writing these promotional essays that sort of document these different aspects of your life. And I had a pile of them. Since I'd had 7 books come out, I'd write 3 or 4. And so I had this big stack of essays. And then one of the things that I realized about it was that they weren't really the whole truth, right? When you write a personal essay, you're sort of carving out a narrative that works for the magazine or the newspaper that you're selling it to. And so there was a specific kind of story that I was trying to tell through it. And I looked at those stories and I was like, there's more to this story and there's a bigger picture to it. And I think I want to tell that story. Also, I would say that there is an essay that there's a couple of stories that are in this book that I wasn't able to sell, but I wanted them to exist in the world. And I thought maybe I'll just write a book around them.
You're talking about promotion, you're talking about writing essays to, shill for books that you sold. And one thing I love about this book of Jami's is that in some ways it's a wildly romantic book about following your heart and following your dreams. But in other ways, it's deeply pragmatic and honest about what it takes to live a creative life. And it could almost be, there's a, really utilitarian element to it that you could almost hand it as a guidebook to somebody who's young or maybe not young and trying to figure out how to bring some of those dreams to fruition and how to live a creative life. You write that there are certain questions that you have to ask if you want to be a writer or a maker of art. And I'm quoting Jami here. What kinds of stories should I be telling? What would I be willing to do to make it all work? What do I love about writing? What secrets of mine would I be willing to tell? What do I know already? And the list goes on. But did you find yourself posing any different questions in writing memoir, or did this fundamental catechism kind of remain the same?
I mean, for me, it was really about creating the boundaries. It really was about how much of myself I was willing to give. And I sought advice from so many memoirists and about
Tell us, like, what kind of advice
like
did they give you?
like Samantha Irby is a really good example. Like I said, how do I know how far to go? And she said, you have to imagine that the person who might check you out at the grocery store could have read your book. So you have to be willing to and for example, if some of you now have read my book, and so you know lots about me. So that is like a feeling that you really have to like connect with, is like, are you willing to share this, be that, I mean, that was really like the boundaries was probably the biggest question of this book. Like, I had a moment, even I think when I gave it to my mother to read, I was like, you're gonna know now, you're gonna know some stuff, that kind of thing. But I was approaching, I'm almost 52 now, and I started writing it when I was, I think, 48 or 49. And I was like, I just think that I'm okay to talk about this stuff. I'm okay. And there's plenty that I left out of the book too. But I really think the biggest question was, and then the hardest question, that was a big question, but a hard question was, why is this important? Why is this relevant? And no matter what stage you're at as a writer, and you probably ask this sometimes to yourself when you're writing a piece, it's like, or pitching a piece or something like that, it's like, why would anyone care about the story? Well, it is like an act of ego to think that people would care about it. And another piece of advice that was given to me about my life, and another piece of advice that was given to me, was by my friend Rosie Schaap, who had written one memoir and has another on the way. And she said, you have to make yourself the biggest jerk in the book, right? Like, you have to call yourself on everything, and right, and make sure that you're not just like the star of the show, and make it as much about the other people that you're talking about as you are about yourself. Go ahead.
No, I don't know if you succeeded in being the biggest. I mean, there was a rogues gallery of, you know, trying to think of some words that aren't bad words. I can't think of any. Rogues gallery of, yes, rogues. But one line that it made me laugh, but it made me think too. You're right. Jamie's writing about a perhaps ill-advised stint in Portland, and she writes, I had two ill-advised affairs, one which does not merit discussion because some people are worth writing about and some people aren't. And I just love that. I mean, I'm like, if I could also just apply that perhaps to not only writing, but life. But what's your litmus test? Like, how did you figure out who cleared the bar for inclusion? I mean, was it about what served the story? Was it about what you could bear? Some combination of those two. That line, I loved it. It made me laugh.
I mean, I did write around that for a second, and then I was like, you know what? I need to acknowledge. Something in me made me want to acknowledge that moment, but also just to say you're not worth it. Okay, so the thing is that this book is, I think, 72,000 words, and my first draft was 92,000 words. So and there's one person who's read that original first draft, my friend Claire, who still likes me. And so I wrote everything down, and I was trying to figure out kind of what the book was about, which you would happen with a novel, would happen with memoir. It's like you write and write until you write your way into figuring what it's about. And so I was like, is this book about being a woman? Is this book about being an American? Is this book about being a writer? Those were kind of my three threads that I was coming in at. And I eventually arrived at the point that this book was really about being a writer. Those other threads were important, but that was the story that I chose to tell. I figured out what the book was about. And then once I decided that was about what it was about, then I was able to figure out what stayed in and what didn't. Because everything that's in there sort of is really kind of about how I became the writer that I am today, and these things that kind of influenced me along the way. So I think like writing a memoir that's just about the story of your life, unless you're a super famous person, which I am not, like nobody really kind of will really care. So I think it's more about figuring out what the specific storyline is.
I mean, did that factor into your structural choices too? Because the book, it's not a chronological account of my name is Jami Attenberg and I was born, in the
Yes.
Chicago suburbs in 1971.
But it was
What?
the order of importance to me.
Mm,
That's how I thought of the book. That I thought this is because when you think about the 10, I'll make this number up, 10 most important things in your life, they don't always come in the order that they happen. And
mm,
so these felt like really important. So like the first chapter of the book is really not that part that I read, but the first chapter of the book is about my mother and the ghosts in our family and the way I feel about myself physically and how my mother, raised me in certain ways. And that is the core every day when you wake up and you look at yourself in the mirror. For me, maybe not for you, but for me every day. So that's like the starting point for me. So all these things sort of got organized in that way and how they played out for me.
just let's get into mothers and daughters for a minute, though.
Dare we? Dare we?
Jami, I learned in reading Jami's book that writing about mothers and daughters is her most beloved and fruitful creative territory. I mean, I knew that on some level, but it was interesting to hear you say it. You know, to say it so clearly. Like, d- did you tread lightly on mothers and daughters here? Did you say what you wanted to say? Did you find uh, you mentioned giving your mom the book. I mean, what is it like, yeah, writing?
I thought so. My parents come off great in this book. Because at some point I love my parents. But at some point I decided if this book is about me being a writer, then I want to talk about how they influenced me as writers. So there's like a million stories that you could tell about your family, but I chose the parts that were important to that part of the story. So there's a chapter in this, if you haven't read it yet, that is about my father, and he's a traveling salesman. And I interviewed him about his history of being a traveling salesman because I think that connects with me being a writer, as someone who goes out on the road, someone who has to talk about the work in a way, kind of sell their work to people. And I think that's something that, and his father was a salesperson, and there's like a generation, it's genetic almost in our way. It's been handed down. So that was really interesting to me. And that was connected to how I became a writer. And it was a way of me also connecting with him as I wrote the book. So all of these things are, again, it just goes back to how did this influence me? How did this inspire me?
Well, you talked about these kind of three threads or three identities or three subplots that you had to find the right hierarchy for um, in in the architecture of the book. I think there's a fourth, and you touched on it here, but it's also being a traveler or being a seeker, being
Sure.
someone on a quest, someone who's trying to find their place in the world. Like, how did you conceive of the role of travel and of being on the road in this book? Because it's a real road book too, and I love that about it.
And also, I want to say there's a little bit of Jew in there. There's a little bit of Midwesterner in there. So New York, there's all those kinds of things. Yeah, I mean that I think that there was. I wrote about it because it really does impact so much my writing and my life, because I have traveled for my books for years and years and years, and I love it. And because I've been published internationally, I've traveled around the world because of my books too. And I didn't know how to get off the road. That was part of it. So, and I think also with the pandemic, there was a sense of longing for travel, because as I was writing, even though I'd already sold the book on proposal, I was actually writing it during the pandemic, and I was like looking back and remembering who that person was. That person was who I was for such a long time, and then I had to sort of figure out who I was without it, and how I could learn from it. So travel is, I mean, it's just really who I was. Books create incredible opportunities for people. It has created incredible opportunities for me, and to be able to travel because of my work, because of my writing, because of my words, was meant so much to me. It's the way that I connect with the world, the way that I communicate with the world, and so it felt important for me to talk about that.
Um, Interestingly, though, I mean, there's also a tension between the sense that like where you are is incidental in a way too, because your writing is your home, or it was for all this. I mean, maybe after a certain point, you decided you wanted a bed, and Jamie has a wonderful line in the book that says, "It wasn't really a room of one's own I wanted so much. It was a guest room, so I could pay back all those people and open my home to all the people who had welcomed me along the way." So, what? How do you feel now that you've kind of like been through that, you know, peripatetic, just endless motion phase? You've been through the enforced, um, you know, stagnancy in a way of the pandemic, and here you are in Paris, which I will note does not make an appearance in the book. But where are you? Where are you now with that push and pull and that
of travel.
longing?
I mean, gosh, it's really nice to be here. This is such a beautiful day. And I was in Berlin yesterday for a week, and it was really wonderful, and Prague before that. And I go to Italy tomorrow. And I'm on vacation. This is my only event. Although it's like I'm working as I'm traveling. It just feeds me. It feeds my brain. I love it. I love being out in the world. I love talking to people. I love seeing, just being overstimulated. And then going back to, I live in New Orleans, and going back to my very quiet existence in New Orleans and processing all the things that I've seen. I love talking to people. I'm a better writer and a better person when I'm out in the world. I think I've slowed down a little bit. I'm just because you get older and you can't do as much, I think. Um, Meaning like I'm can go all day in Paris, people, but I ain't going clubbing tonight. You know what I mean? Whereas I used to do that. I used to definitely go out, but like I'll have like a couple drinks and I'm going back to the hotel. But I think it's really, I'm going to travel as long as I can. There's so like, I don't think the pandemic made me want to give up on it. It made me want to go back to it. It really, really bounced back to it. And just really, I just love to, I think about it as eating the world.
Um, there were periods though where you went, where you were experiencing like real anxiety and kind of
Yes.
disconnectedness. I mean, disconnectedness and then, actual panic attacks and anxiety during this period where you were on the road. And this might be a slightly self-indulgent and kind of meta question, but I really want to get into this because I'm just dying to ask you.
Okay.
I was so struck by this passage in which you write about that period. And you write, I had a vulnerability about my public private persona and about having to engage an audience in a specific way, not just as a person who had written a book, but also as a personality, an author with a capital A. Um, do you think a writer has to be that capital A figure? Like, what do you think is the relationship between writing this thing that's done largely in solitude and then performance, and as you acknowledge, salesmanship also, this thing that has to happen to get your writing read?
I mean, I just think I definitely feel different about it now. I definitely writing about the anxiety that I experienced, which is like this weird. Um, I've had to deal with my relationship with social media. So it was sort of when I was writing about that period of time. So I was probably about 45, 46, so 6 or 7 years ago, was really when it just everything kind of shifted. So when I first started out publishing books, there were lots of book reviews, like newspaper sections, that had book reviews. And there were you could go out and your book would be talked about for a couple of months and it would be out in the world. And then there's something shifted, 6 or 7 years ago, where there was like this big pressure to be present on social media in a way that had never been there before, not just in this industry, but in lots of industries. And it was like seeing pictures of yourself all the time and not understanding, not being able to get a handle on it, right? It was very overwhelming. And I've since spent the time figuring out what it means to craft a narrative, figure out how I want to present myself to the world, the things that I want to talk about, the boundaries that I want to have. Like I've done actual work on this. I did for and I did it during 2020 2021 I worked on I don't, it's not even accepting myself because I'm still going to be a neurotic lady for the rest of my life, but really kind of accepting like what my relationship was or how much I needed to do it and knowing that I could take time off when I wanted to take time off and go back to it. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question or not.
No, you are. I mean, I'm curious to know if you are willing to share any of them, what some of the boundaries or rules or just kind of like not even rules, but I don't know,
I don't talk
promises
I don't
or
talk
you
about my
made.
love life
Yeah.
at all. and like never really will again publicly. I mean, I know that I talk about it a little bit in this book, but it's not, but it's pretty like I have, like when you have to get clearance on something like
The
that.
men are pretty incidental
Yeah, they are
in
really
the
are.
book. I
They
mean,
really,
even though
it's so
there's
funny
love
because
and there's,
yeah,
heartbreak, but it's
it's so
not.
funny because the person who was the most concerned about it is like really not a big deal in this book at all. But and requested some changes, and I was like, okay, I mean, minor. Um, but yeah, I think that's part of it. I think I also kind of configured my relationship with what kind of writer I wanted, what I wanted to offer the world. And so I've really transitioned into, instead of sometimes I think on some forms of social media, like on this is not very literary, but it is part of the business that we're talking about. On Instagram, I'm happy to post lots of pictures, fun pictures, because I think I appreciate when other people do, and I think it's entertaining. I'll try to be funny sometimes on Twitter. The newsletter is really, I have a newsletter that about writing, and that's where I put most of my energy, and that is the most positive thing that I do with my time, for really truly. And even though I love writing books, but like on a regular basis, that's like the good energy that I'm putting out there in the world on social media. And once I figured out that, then everything got a lot easier. Once you figure, and I think I talk about this book, but it's like, and I think even in the thing that I read, it's like once you figure out what your plan is, everything gets a lot easier. And I really, this is me. I am talking to you now. This is not like I'm not being, I mean, I'm technically being performative because there's a microphone here, and I'm in front of an audience, but like, I no longer,
Like, what was it that you thought you had to be?
nice, like a nice lady. And I wanted people to like me. And like, and it's nobody's perfect all the time. And sometimes you're tired and sometimes you can't finish the sentence. Thank you. That was very helpful that you got me out of not finishing that sentence. And, and, like, you can't, it's like the same thing as when people read your books. Once I got to that place too, that was really helpful. You can't write a book that everyone's going to love, right? Because you don't even know when people pick up the book what they expect for it, what kind of day they had, what they, how they feel about themselves. If you're writing about messed up families, which I do, you don't know how they feel about their own families. You cannot please everybody with your work. So it's the same thing if I'm just talking to people in an audience. Like, you all could come here looking for a totally different answer to the question, to what I'm asking or what you're asking. Like, there could be so many other things that you want out of this conversation that we're having right now, but I'm only me and I can only tell you what my truth is. So once I got there, instead of trying to like do a little song and dance every single time, it just got easier. Is that an older middle-aged thing? Maybe, I don't know.
Oh, I'm taking notes. I mean, I've always thought it was just such a supreme irony that people who are really good at sitting in a room alone, there's an expectation, or I mean, it's almost like people who write for a living, often the very last thing they would want to do is
Of course.
go talk about it. So
Yeah.
it's a hard thing, but you also, you want to meet people who are reading you and you want to get your writing out in the world. So I am happy to just hear what you have to say about that. We were kind of joking about men being incidental, and it's maybe not so much men as, but there's something really lovely that comes through in the book, which is that you're looking for some different forms of love, really, some different forms of support. Like, what is the role? How were you thinking about community when you were writing the book?
Well, it was again that same like
I mean,
long
I'm not saying to the exclusion
of
of men, but
love.
it's like
Yeah.
friendship is so important in the book. There are so many friends in the book. There are colleagues. There are students. There are people who are working alongside you. And I just thought that was interesting because we don't always read about those relationships. Um,
Oh, well, again, it was that is the same as travel, where it was like this sense of longing because I was missing friends because I was writing it during the pandemic. But truly, there again, it's that. Sorry to keep hitting this note, but it really does help me to become a better writer, to have my peers, to be able to say, can you read that? We all are swapping so I know there's like a writers group that's here, and you're all probably sharing each other's work with each other, and that's really meaningful. When I think about some of my first readers, it's like some people are the people who just tell you it's great and they just love everything you're doing, and then there's some people who read your work and they think that they're the ones who are going to give you like really specific notes, and that's really meaningful too. And so it probably plays out the same in friendships too, right? There's always like that friend who's like, I love you, like they just think you're funny and charming and you can do no wrong. And then there's that friend who like challenges you and helps you to grow, and you grow together in a specific way, and that's really important. So I just get so much more out of my friendships than I do my romantic relationships. They're very nice people, you know. So I don't want to like, but truly like those are, and I feel like I know a lot of women who feel the same way, that they sort of have their husband and then they have like this really rich friendship. I mean, it's true. I see some nodding, so it's true. So it's like it is true for some people anyway. It's good. It's just good. It's they make me I feel like less alone with my friendships in the world, and whereas sometimes when I'm in a relationship it can make you feel more alone.
What about moving to New Orleans, Jamie? I mean, how has that changed your um how, do you think it's changed you as a writer? Has it made you want to write about any different things? Has it made you want to write differently? Do you have more time, less time, more of a community, less of a community? Just
Wow, these are really good.
what's
This
that?
is why you get paid the big bucks, Lauren Collins. Um, I do love it there. I think I'm happier there. I do have a house now, and I do have a guest room now, which is really nice. People can come and stay there with me.
Is that an invitation?
Yes,
Okay.
come on down anytime. I'll show you a good time. I just built a new back porch too, for we sit and have a cocktail outside. Yeah, I think it has, even just like on a really basic level, like I think I'm going to probably start writing about the environment more than I have in the past, because the environment is just day to day there in a way that I'd never felt when I lived in New York City, or certainly not in Chicago, but that was a long time ago. So having like lived through hurricane seasons, that feels like it's changed me. It's altered me. It's very, I lead a very small life there, and I don't think I would have arrived at the place that I've arrived at in terms of what the boundaries are and how I want to use my time, and how I want to reach out to community, if I didn't live there. I think I learned a lot from living there. But then again, there was a part of me that was longing for that, maybe subconsciously, and went to a place where I could have that and knew that it was there. And things had just become, my priorities had changed. I love it there. It is a very complicated place. It has a lot of wonderful things going on there. It has a lot of problems there. But it's really important to me to try to support that place. And I think it's a really good place also to age. Whereas I think in New York City would have been a much harder place to do that. It's much more, people of all ages hang out with each other there, and it's not as like siloed, and people just feel more connected, and I appreciate that.
Um, Tell us a little bit about A Thousand Words of Summer. This kind of, I mean, it went from, I think, a conversation with a friend for you to a hashtag to an international collective creative phenomenon. And is anybody in this audience participating? Do you all know what it is? Oh, okay. Whoa.
Hi, everybody.
Okay.
Yay. It's great.
I know
Everyone.
you'll all have questions too. So in a minute, I'll stop talking. But
Oh, yes, I do have one in the winter, and I'm going to have one in the fall also after this. So A Thousand Words of Summer is a thing that I started. This is the 6th year. It starts in a month. And a friend of mine and I were talking about just wanting to kind of kickstart our writing, and so I was like, let's do 1,000 words a day for 2 weeks. And I usually write 1,000 words on a good work day anyway, which is like a lot of work. But on the other hand, I don't know how much you do.
I mean, 1,000 words is if I'm writing.
Yes.
That's the goal.
Yes, that's a goal.
And anything more is gravy.
Right, exactly.
And I can stop when I've written 1,000 words.
That's right.
I can go do something else.
That's exactly right. You
Yeah.
have the right
But it's
attitude.
really, I mean, the thing is, like, it's not hard to write 1,000 words one day, but it is, you know, it's both hard, but like infinitely more constructive to write 1,000 words
every
10
day.
days.
Yes,
or-
exactly. Yes, exactly. Because then you have a big pile of words, right? And then you can look at all the things, and you're sort of in it. You're in the rhythm of it all. And so I started that, and I went on Twitter, and I was like, I think I'm going to do this, and everyone said, oh, we want to do it too. Like, not everyone. Some people said, I want to do it too. Maybe like 100 people said it, and I was like, okay, I'll just like put this little, because I don't know how to do things small. I have to build things. I like to build things. That's why I'm so productive. Like there's something in me, whatever it is, that likes to invite people in and construct things and just keep piling things to see how high you can go and how far you can go. And so I created a little newsletter. People could sign up for it. And I was like, I'm going to send out a letter every day. And then I had like a couple hundred people. And by the end of that session, I had 2,000 people signed up for it. And it was letters from all these authors that I knew, just saying their thoughts on creativity, productivity. Some of it was just like, you can do this, you got it, you know. And so I did it again the next year, and then the next year, and every year was like doubling in the people. And now we have 30,000 people signed up for it, and it's a lot of people. And I think there'll be more.
Multiply 30,000 people times 1,000 words a day. I mean, that's
a lot of words.
Generating.
It's so crazy to even like imagine. And also I know now people have written books and sold books and published books, and I'm like keep finding random books where I'm thanked in the acknowledgments, people I've never met before.
There should be a section soon.
I know. It's like my blurb section. I have little blurb section books I blurbed on my bookshelf, and now I should probably like grab them all or whatever. But it's really, really sweet. And people have met other friends, built cohorts, finished books, finished master's thesis, written screenplays, everything. And it's really about just doing a good day's work in the end. But I like 1,000 words as like a number, as a figure. It's something to shoot for. But like my poet friends are not writing 1,000 words of poetry a day. They might write a poem a day. I think that's probably a good day's work. Right, something like that. Whatever, it's like sitting down and doing work for a couple hours a day or all day, however long it takes you. So it's turned out to be, and now it's going to be a book, which is going to come out in about 6 months. And it's really, I think I can talk about it online. I don't know. I haven't really talked about it very much, but it is.
What's the format?
Yeah.
At the very least?
So it's in it. So a part of it is a collection of some of the letters. There's 54 contributing authors, some of whom have not actually been published yet. Their letters haven't been published, and they've done stuff specially for the book. And then part of it is I've expanded the metaphor to be all the seasons and how the creative process works in all the seasons. So for example, winter is about being thoughtful about who you are as a writer and why you're writing, and exploring what it means to be creative. And spring is about preparing, figuring out what your distractions are, figuring out if you're your own distraction, setting yourself up, figuring out where you want to sit, how you're going to make the time of the day to do your work. And then summer is still summer, and it's about being messy and generative. And then fall is about giving yourself grace for that which you have not accomplished yet. And it's little vignettes that are encouraging and ask you questions. And then it has all these letters from different authors kind of mixed in it. And honestly, the community inspired this book, and the letters from these authors really inspired the book. And I just looked at everything that I'd learned for 5 years, and it was like the season sort of formed in front of my face. And it's just kind of capturing the conversation that already exists in a book. Do you want to buy a copy? Please.
I know you all have questions you're probably dying to ask. So I'm going to stop there, and we have, I think, 15 minutes for questions. So have at it.
No, that's
Hi, Jamie. Thanks for coming. It's a pleasure to see you in person. I recently was gifted How to Write an Autobiographical Novel by Alexander Chee.
Oh, it's great.
It's great.
Yeah.
And through Alexander Chee, when he talks about being an undergrad at Wesleyan and studying with Annie Dillard, I went back to my college textbooks about creative writing and reread essays, one of them by Annie Dillard, where she talks about memoir writing and how when you write memoir, you end up forgetting the actual events that happened and you only remember the way that you wrote it. And I've had that experience personally in writing memoir, of then talking with friends about whatever X event that had happened and trying to which version actually happened? Was it this version or that version? And which one is the one that I wrote? And I was wondering what your experience is, if you've had that experience as a writer as well.
Of like writing. I mean, I think I don't know if this is quite the answer, but I think it's about when you write it, right? So if you write something in the moment versus if you write something 10 years later or 20 years later, I think your experience of it changes. And so there's one chapter in this book I can think of where I wrote it over a period of 5 or 6 years. And each time I attacked it, it became kind of a different story and more details kept coming in. So it's about, I think with writing memoir, it's about figuring out what the aboutness of it is and the point that you're trying to make. And then I don't know if the truth does matter, but your need of the truth changes. That sounded really mysterious, but it makes sense, I think. Anybody else?
Hi.
Hi.
So I had a question about if is there anything that you learned from writing this memoir and putting it together that you took directly into writing the next novel? I read that you finished.
Yes.
Congrats.
I have an answer for that question.
Ooh.
So usually when I write novels, they're very not claustrophobic, but they're about a specific time, or it's someone lives in a specific apartment building. I'm sorry, I keep moving this away from my mouth. Or it's about a specific time period, but it's like really like closed in. And when I wrote the memoir, it moves all over the world and spans so many years. And I felt really good and loose and free. And I was like, man, I want to do that. So the novel that I'm working on now spans 40 years. And I've sent them to the characters to different places, like all over America or around the world. And even after I had written the memoir, and met with my editor, she said, you know what I think you need to do for the next book? And I was like, stretch myself in new directions and really push things. And so that was part of it, that it was like, I needed to move out of, it was something I needed to do. I mean, my gut instinct was like, again, that novel fatigue idea was like, I needed to try something different. And I did learn from it. So I do recommend trying different forms. Like I love it when poets write essays, and now having written this 1,000 words book and writing the newsletter feels like I'm learning from that too. I don't know. It's kind of weird. It's like a self-help book, which I find very strange because I know what my issues are. You know what I mean? But I do know how to write and sit down and do the writing. Anyway, yes, it was very helpful.
I'm so glad you're here. It's really nice to hear you. I wanted to say one thing. I read your book and then I listened to your book, and whoever you chose for the narrator, I thought was terrific.
Oh, that's good.
So
You don't really get to choose.
you don't get to
You
choose.
sort of hear it, but it's a done deal kind of.
So
Yeah.
somebody else chooses.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that as an author, I find the way you write your Instagram and your Substack just very inspiring. You're very down to earth. And
Thank you.
I didn't even notice that you didn't share your love life, because you shared the death of your dog, you share your building of your porch. And today you said you might go to Germany for a little while and work. And so it feels like you're sharing so much of yourself. I didn't even notice what you weren't sharing.
Oh, that's good.
Are you serious? Would you?
It's working then.
Are you serious? Would you give yourself kind of a work job in Berlin?
I mean, I don't know when I would go. I would love to go. I really enjoyed going to Berlin, and just to go and hang out there. That seemed like a really cool place to write. I've been told don't go there in the winter. And so I don't know. I would have to be like maybe for like a month or something like that. Everyone says it's very cold and wet there. So I learned very quickly. I was like, I love it. They're like, you love it right now in May. um, yeah, I mean, I will go anywhere and do anything if it made sense and it served my bigger projects. Oh, really? You want to pay my rent for me? American Library in Paris? Yeah, I mean, okay, I want to say something about 1,000 words. Can I just talk about it for a second? One of the reasons why I started 1,000 words is because, or why I really leaned into the newsletter is because I always had 1,000 words, but I never really regularly updated the newsletter. I took these people's names and I said, I'm only going to bother you once a year with this writing thing. And then when summer 2020 happened, I was teaching, I always did workshops and things like that. And then it became just a Zoom scenario. And I was like, and when you teach, and this is not, I think teaching is so important, but when you teach like these kind of private writing workshop things, you just think, oh my God, I'm only talking to like 6 people and this is how I'm focusing all my energy and I can't share any of the things that I know. And at some point in 2020, I went, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm just going to like move it over to the newsletter. And that way I can reach the most amount of people that I can reach, which is why now when I have 30,000 people, I'm like, oh, that was what I was supposed to do. Because now I can like talk about writing on such a grand scale. And it's like the fact that I'm sitting here and some of you are subscribers is wild to me, amazing, like it's actually reaching people. And that's what I want to do. Like, that's what it's about. Like when you publish something, right? You're like, so many people get to read it. If you're in the New Yorker, it's like, it's really widely read. And so it just makes me feel really positive to do all these. Like, that's what I'm trying to do, is just get to a place where I'm using my time in the best way possible before I exit this planet. Not to get too existential about it, but truthfully. The skull. Yes. Yes.
Hi, I have 2 questions. I could say it's a 2-part question, but I just have 2 questions. The first is, you mentioned that there's something about New Orleans that helped you organize your life the way you wanted to organize it. And what is it about New Orleans? Like, what is it about the city? And the second question is, I assume that you read while you're writing, and I was wondering what you read to inspire you for this book.
Okay, let's see. Well, New Orleans, just because I don't live in a big apartment building anymore. I live in a little house, and I was able to afford a little house with a little backyard. And I know my community, and in a way that is different than not that you can't know a community or be part of a community in New York, it is possible, but that was my scenario in New York. And when I moved there, it was like, things just got very simple. And it was, and I think it's just moving to a smaller place, but also, it is a very community-oriented place, so that was helpful. What was the second question? I just forgot it. What am I reading? So let's see. When I was reading this, when I wrote All Grown Up, which was 2 books before it, I had wanted that to have a memoiristic feel, and so I had read a lot of memoirs then. So I'd read that Heidi Julavitz book, which was really good, and Eileen Miles, and then when I was reading this book, I read Kiesi Lehman's book Heavy, it's so great. And it was just incredibly freeing to read that, because he also really plays with boundaries in that book. And I was like, if he can be this brave, then I can tell my little whatever stories, like he's really brave. If you haven't read that book, it's amazing. So I think that was really important. Alex Chee's book, How to Write an Autobiographic Novel, is obviously really influential. I read a lot of poetry, which I mentioned in this book. So, Morgan Park, there's a lot of books mentioned in this book. So I would say those are the books that I was reading and thinking about, as I was writing it, because I was rereading them too. And then it's like really basic, but I do talk about Patti Smith's Just Kids, and it's a classic for a reason. I mean, it's just a really it's really inspiring. It's like a book that I used to give to people all the time. If you haven't read it yet, it's great. And it just makes you want to make art, be a creative person. My favorite thing is when people who are creative, but they aren't writers, they're a lot of visual artists or musicians read this book and it means something to them. Because my hope is not just about writing, but about being creative in general. Anybody else? Hi.
This side of the room needs to ask a question.
As a lady who has traveled all over the world and all over the nation in the United States, what was the catalyst that brought you to New Orleans?
I mean, I just loved it. I was there like so one year when I didn't have any money and I couldn't afford to live in New York anymore. I would always sublet my apartment and go live somewhere else, and I would find and so I really just went on like Facebook one day and was like, does anyone have a cheap apartment to rent? And I was like, where haven't I tried yet? Because I knew I wasn't going to live in New York for my entire life. And so I was like, well, Austin, I've never lived in Austin. I've never lived in New Orleans. And I really went on Facebook and I was like, does anyone know anyone? And somebody said, Sarah Ivory, that was her name, said, my friends are looking to rent their place. They just posted on their Facebook wall. And that is how I ended up in New Orleans for the first time, through social media and just randomly following, I don't know, just following stuff, just careless, carefree, not really carefree because I was real broke, but I liked it down there because nobody cared what you did for a living. And New York is really exhausting in that way sometimes. So it was great. I just found myself there.
Is there anywhere you find that you write best, or can you write anywhere?
I used to say, it's true, I can write. I mean, I've been on this trip now for 2 weeks and I've written every day. Like I found myself starting a short story for no reason. It was like this hand just went towards the notebook and I just started one the other day and it was really fun. But the best thing is to be at home at my desk, getting up, going and having coffee, going for a walk and sitting down and writing and handwriting. I handwrite first and then I type up. And when I'm doing 1,000 words, I'm handwriting. I know now how much I need to handwrite. Or sometimes if I go to a cafe, I'll type it into my phone. And again, I can, because I just do it. It's my one trick, right? Is that I can write as I know how much I need to write 1,000 words. But I like things calm and quiet in order to write. Yeah. Party trick. I have a party trick.
Hello, thanks for being here. You said something about how you wrote about being Jewish, and I was wondering, why did you choose to include that, and why did you think it was important?
I mean, it's just a part of me. It's how I was raised Jewish. So I'm more culturally Jewish than I am. Like I don't practice really, although I just went to Passover Seder the other day and remembered those prayers real fast. And everyone's like, why are you talking so fast? Why are you saying them so fast? And I was like, that's how we did it at my house so we could get to the food. Everyone just go mumble through it so we could get to the food as quickly as possible. Because some people were like, we want to enjoy the words. And I was like, no, you don't. This is long. We just need food. Yeah, so I don't know. It's just like, it's part of me. It's some, I have written about Jewish families before. It's just part of me.
One more question, if there is one. Yes, another one.
Hi again.
Hi.
What was the most joyful part about the memoir, like writing? What part writing it?
Oh, I mean, always I think it's just showing it to people and having them like it, I think. I mean, I love writing a great sentence and I love figuring, when everything sort of slots into place and you can figure out how you want to lay out each chapter, what the order of it is, moving parts. I love moving parts. I love architecture. But always it's just like I'm writing because I want to make something interesting for my friends too. So it's quite meaningful in that way. Like, and it's meaningful when it's meaningful to other people. This was a vastly different experience than putting out a novel. And I just realized I'm far enough away from it coming out that I'm actually really enjoying this experience and this conversation. But I much prefer talking about fiction because you can hide behind fiction. Whereas this is like, you're really talking about yourself and the story of your life. But now I've figured out how to appreciate this experience. Probably when you have an incredible interviewer. Can we give her some applause? Very helpful. But yeah, I just want to make something that's cool and that will mean something to people. So hopefully, I just want help.